Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Nintzel, host of AZ Illustrated Politics, our weekly commentary and analysis of local, state, and national news. On tonight's show, we take a special look back at the top political stories of the year and find out where they might be going in 2014. That's coming up next on AZ Illustrated Politics, but first, a look at today's top stories.
Arizona's housing market continues to improve, with prices rising and sales brisk. So brisk, in fact, that sales volume is down because fewer houses are available. That's from the monthly report of RealtyTrack, a California company that follows foreclosure sales and the housing market. RealtyTrack said the median price of a house sold in Arizona last month was $165,000, an 18% increase from a year earlier. The report also said sales volume fell 12% from a year ago, driven by investors buying many of the houses on the market. The University of Arizona's winter graduation will be tomorrow morning on the Tucson campus. 2,500 people will be awarded degrees. The keynote graduation speaker will be Scott Pask, a U of A alumnus and three-time Tony Award-winning costume designer. Arizona's monthly tax revenue report is out and the numbers are good. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee reported that state revenues were nearly 5% higher in November than a year ago. The big gains came in sales taxes on construction materials, up nearly 13%, and retail sales taxes, up more than 7%. The report said the state is running slightly ahead of budget projections through the fiscal year's first 5 months. It's unknown how many Tucsonans who shopped at Target stores may be affected by a credit and debit card breach. Nationally, Target reported that 40 million customer card numbers were stolen as they were used in stores. In Tucson, a Better Business Bureau official said consumers should watch their bank accounts and report fraudulent charges. And that's a look at tonight's headlines.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next News Hour, what Congress didn't accomplish this year, plus Shields and Brooks. That's Friday on the PBS News Hour.
Join Arizona Week with new host Lorraine Rivera as she examines the issues important to our community and provides in-depth analysis of the week's top news stories. That's tonight at 8:30 on PBS 6.
Twenty 2013 featured a lot of bruising political fights this year over immigration, healthcare, and our election laws. Here to talk about the top political stories of the year are Leah Marquez-Peterson, president of the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, former state lawmaker Jonathan Paton, and attorney Jeff Rogers, the former chairman of the Pima County Democratic Party. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Leah, I don't think there's any story we came back to as much this year as immigration. I think because we live here near the border, and our two senators, Jeff Flake and John McCain, were at the heart of the Gang of Eight that worked out this immigration reform plan that passed the Senate but stalled in the House. What do you spent a lot of time lobbying this year, House members, trying to convince them to move forward with some kind of immigration reform. What do you think the holdup is on the immigration reform?
I mean, the holdup is the complexity of the issue. I mean, as we were there talking to the Arizona House delegation, and I know we talked on a previous show about our trip to Washington, D.C. in late October, there were different pieces of the bill that each of them pointed out. It seemed like there was support for the Dreamers, support for those that had served in the military. The biggest hurdle, though, however, is pathway to citizenship, and whether it's earned, whether it's special, so much language and ideology that goes into where there's support or not for immigration reform. It seems, however, like there could still be activity in 2014. I think many of us were encouraged that Boehner hired somebody, Rebecca Talent, to focus on immigration, and so we are optimistic that something could still occur in early 2014.
Jeff, what do you think? There was a lot of speculation that this Boehner hire of Becky Talent would be a step towards having some kind of resolution.
Well, she was one of McCain's chief architects of his comprehensive immigration reform policy during the Bush administration. And so I think, like Leah, that gave people a little bit of a glimmer of hope. What gives me another little glimmer of hope is what happened last week with the budget bill in the House. It seemed like Boehner came out and attacked the sort of Tea Party element of the party and what he called the professional right-wingers. And, it kind of seemed like he was stepping up to bat to be a real genuine leader. And so these two things together give me a little glimmer of hope. But what has happened with immigration this past year has been that it's been held hostage by a small cadre of ultra-conservative members who really don't want to see a path to citizenship at all, and many of them don't even want to see the Dreamers get any kind of relief. And so, I think that until Boehner and the moderate Republicans are willing to bring something to the floor, let's say the Senate package of the Gang of Eight, and not pay heed to these ultra-conservative elements, there's probably no hope. But there are the votes there to pass it. If virtually all Democrats support it, and there have been enough people in the Republican Party, enough congressmen and women who've come forward and said they would probably support the comprehensive plan, it would pass. But again, we've got a small, minority who are demanding that the Hastert rule be applied to this, and that a majority of the Republicans must approve it. So, I have a tiny glimmer, but not much hope, because next year, after all, is an election year, and these people are running in safe districts where they, can do whatever they want, say whatever they want.
John McCain has been very outspoken on this issue. He makes an argument that the folks who are here who are undocumented deserve a shot at the American dream, just as everyone else in the country has. But he also makes a political argument, which is that until this immigration reform issue is resolved, Republicans are going to have a hard time reaching out to Latino voters. And leaving aside the first argument, well, what do you think of the political argument that John McCain makes?
I don't really buy into it, and the reason why I don't buy into it is that I think that this issue of comprehensive immigration reform is really one that was more important to the president in getting through because of his base than it has an effect on Republicans. I think that you're seeing numbers among Latinos falling for the president and for Democrats, primarily because they weren't able to do anything on the issue, but secondly is because of Obamacare. There was an expectation in minority communities all across this country that this would be the answer for a lot of the problems in those communities, that Obamacare would fix those problems. And now that it's actually gone the opposite direction, we're seeing those numbers in Latino communities in California, for example, plummet for the president. So I don't really think that this really changes the dynamic for Republicans one way or the other. And I don't think that hiring somebody new in the Speaker's office is going to change what he said even recently, which was that the Senate bill is not going to be put on the board for people to vote on in the House.
And the concern is among House Republicans that if anything passes, it goes to conference and the Senate bill takes over and absorbs whatever the House passes.
And I think that there's a larger issue here as well. And I go back to Obamacare on something else, which is the comprehensive element of this, I think, is one of the things that concerns a lot of people. I think that the days of these giant 1,000-page plus bills, 10,000-page plus bills are pretty much over, at least in this current environment. People don't trust that every detail is going to be worked out. And I think there's a feeling, and Leah alluded to it when she talks to members, they say, well, I might like this, but I don't like that. And I think when you start to see the Christmas trees that massive bills become, I think people get concerned about, well, I might like this one part, but I'm concerned about the details over here. I think that's what's bedeviled this entire time. I think that these things, in my opinion, need to be dealt with in a more of a piecemeal fashion to get support.
That's how that Congress has worked since the beginning of this nation. People compromise and say, look, I've got, this is really important to me. Here's what I want. And my package for immigration reform would look like this. And the Republicans say, no, mine would look like this. And say, okay, well, we got to find some elements that we can agree to disagree about. And you'll get some of your elements, I'll get some of mine, and we'll compromise somewhere in the middle. And that's how legislation gets passed in this Congress. And it always has happened that way. And everybody doesn't get, their full cake to eat and savor. Everybody has to give up a little something to get something they want. And Democrats made a huge number of concessions to the business community and the business lobby over certain kinds of visas and workers. And there were also other concessions made, and then Republicans made some concessions, and that's how we came to have the Gang of Eight bill.
The irony of the reason why this is happening, though, that Jeff is talking about, is that the nature of Congress has changed, and that's just because of the partisanship, but it's also because the committee system has changed dramatically. The individual committee chairs and leadership had much more control over their own parties than they did in the past than they do now.
And there's you mentioned healthcare, and I wanted to shift to healthcare because I think that was another big story of the year, and two major elements of that. And let's start with just the Medicaid expansion here in Arizona. And Leah, the business community, the Chambers of Commerce, your organization, really got behind Governor Brewer's push to get this Medicaid expansion through over the objections of the members of the Republican Party up in Phoenix. Your thoughts of why it was important for the Medicaid expansion to happen?
I think what happened during that time period was that the business community sat back and looked at the issue and realized it made financial sense for the state. In the current environment we were in, it was important to support Medicaid restoration or Medicaid expansion. And we're a little frustrated with a lot of the political ideology that was going into why they wouldn't support it. We realized that a lot of that, at that time, the discussion was around not supporting the Affordable Care Act, yet our state needed to make a decision. And so as a business community, we stepped forward and made sure our voice was heard around the support of Medicaid expansion. And ultimately that happened. There was a majority of support within our state for that. And I think it was still the right thing to do.
And Jonathan, there was a split between the Chambers of Commerce and the Republican lawmakers up in Phoenix. Few Republicans cross party lines voted with the Democrats at the governor's behest. Why was there such a split?
Well, I think that, first of all, when you say that, and we've talked about this on the show before, but when you say the term business community, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I think that hospitals, insurance companies, many of the people that are on the boards of Chambers of Commerce, a lot of them wanted this to go forward. There's others, though, that didn't. And there was a division within not only the business community, but within the Republican Party itself about what the right path is, because the whole topic of Obamacare is a very divisive topic in the United States right now, and it's certainly a very big issue for Republicans. There was no consensus among a lot of different people, but I've learned this from my time in the legislature, that if a governor wants something very badly and she's willing to fight for it, generally she will get it in the end, simply because all chief executives in our state, they have the luxury of being there for a longer period of time than the lawmakers do, and they can simply wait it out, and eventually that coalesced into a victory for the governor. And I think that it was a protracted battle that was pretty much decided when the decision was made long ago and not throughout that process. And
which of the business community members do you think were not on board with this thing?
I think there's a lot of, I'm not going to name names, but I think that they certainly made their voices heard. I think they're going to be more vocal on other issues going into the future. They weren't necessarily in some of the larger organizations like the Chamber, but I know that groups like the Free Enterprise Club and others were very active. A lot of them have members that are in the business community. I think that my main point is that there is a lot of different voices when you say the business community. And I also think that at the end of the day, the die was cast long before this bill ever came up, and that came with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And when that happened, states were put in this position where they had to make these choices, as Leah indicated. And I think that our state made its choice, and a lot of people within the Republican Party say, let's move on and let's start debating some other issues.
Jeff, a lot of Republican governors around the country, though, did not embrace this. Governor Brewer did. You're often at odds with Governor Brewer's decisions, but on this one, you think she made the right call?
Well, there are 8 million reasons why. I mean, that's the amount. $8 billion is the amount of money that it will generate for our state over the next 4 years. And so that together with the moral reason that people did, who are these are basically going to add into the Medicaid people who are kind of the working poor. These are people who are struggling and working to survive, but they're too poor to afford insurance, even on the exchanges, and they're too poor to even afford the benefits of the exchanges that they will get in reduced health care costs. So, these people, they deserve health insurance, and it's the morally correct thing to do. And I think what you're going to see is, mark my words, after this next election cycle, you're going to see extraordinary pressure on the 25 states controlled by Republicans that did not buy into this program. Economists are starting to crunch the numbers. In the past couple of weeks, there have been an extraordinary number of analyses of this about what these states are missing out on. Not to mention the fact that you're creating this gap group. You've got the really poor who are on Medicaid, and you've got the people who are going to qualify for the exchanges, and then you've got people wealthier than that who can afford their own insurance and through their employer, and then you're going to have this gap. People who are sort of the working poor but aren't poor enough to qualify for that, but don't make enough money to qualify for the exchanges. And so you're going to see enormous pressure, and there's already pressure on the rest of these states, and several Republican governors, including John Kasich of Ohio, have thumbed their nose at the extremists in his own legislature and said, I'll find a way to make this work. And we're looking at states like Florida and Michigan where there's a lot of pressure on them to do that as well.
And the other big healthcare story was the Obamacare rollout, which I think we can all agree went fairly disastrously for the president. The website didn't work. You had all these stories about canceled insurance policies coming out. Jeff, Democrats were seeing a lift in the polls after the government shutdown in October, and then this came along and the polls evened out for next year's midterms. It looks like healthcare is going to be at the center of the battle for Congress next year. Are Democrats going to be able to change this narrative?
I think it will be at the center of the narrative for the Republicans. They think this is an issue they can run on and win on. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think this is going to be yesterday's news, that the websites are working phenomenally better and people are starting to understand the benefits of this program. I think by the time we get to March and April, you're going to see this being an issue that the Republicans are going to want to get rid of, because there's too many people who are going to be gaining a lot of advantages in their life and living a better life because of the Affordable Care Act. So I think we're going to see a big change, and 11 months from now is a long ways away, and we've seen just the newest polling in the past few days show we've already made up most of that gap that we lost because of the disastrous rollout. I have to agree with that.
Jonathan, is this going to be the issue of 2014 for Republicans? We had three close congressional races in Arizona last year. You're well familiar with at least one of them because you were in one of them. Is this a year with a different sort of electorate turning out without the presidential election people turning out? Are you going to see Republicans able to win these three competitive seats in Arizona?
Absolutely, and I think that, when the president's underwater in California, I think that kind of says it all. And I think that Debbie Wasserman Schultz said that this is going to be an issue that Democrats were going to run on. I think Jeff just told us that they're not going to run on it. They're not going to talk about it. They're going to run away from it as fast as they possibly can, because this isn't about a website. It's ultimately not about a website. The website was essentially a canary in a coal mine. The real issue was when you saw these people that were losing their coverage. That is going to begin to grow beyond what we're already seeing. There's going to be more problems that were folded into this giant bill. I think that you're going to find all kinds of problems happening throughout the country. And by the way, there's a lot of businesses right now that are realizing there are ways to get out of this straitjacket that Washington has put into them. I think that it is a complete disaster. I think it's going to be an albatross around the Democrats' necks going into this next election cycle, and it's too bad because I think it's going to constrain the economy, and I think that it's one of the worst blunders of the decade that the Democrats made.
Jeff, you want to respond?
Well, first off, I think the economy, what the stock market grew by 20 to 25% this past year, probably grow by a similar amount next year, maybe only 15 to 20%. I think the economy is coming as close to booming as it can, given the fact that we couldn't get any more stimulus packages because the Republicans blocked them, and because of the fact that government spending has gone down 3% since 2010, which which is unprecedented in the history of this nation. And some of that spending has a stimulative effect to the economy. So I think we're going to see two things next year. One, we're going to run on the economy, and we're going to run on the Affordable Care Act. And we're going to be proud to run on both of those things in the 2014 cycle.
I want to be here in
and
11 months
and let me-
to
let
have
me-
that conversation.
we're going to win on both those issues.
Let me bring Leah into this conversation.
please.
And what are your business members
Okay, so-
talking about the Affordable Care Act? What
Our
are their
Hispanic
thoughts?
Chamber represents, over 1,000 businesses and predominantly small businesses, 25 employees or less. So this has been top of mind. I believe, I support what Jonathan said, that it is going to be a constraint on the economy. What I'm seeing locally within the small business community is a wariness at hiring, at perhaps investing. They're not unsure of what the cost could be in the upcoming future in terms of their healthcare costs. Just a lot of uncertainty around it, and I think that was exemplified, that was expounded on with the delay in SHOP. We embraced the idea that Obamacare had passed, that we needed to help our businesses as best we could within the chamber, and we actually brought a navigator on staff with assistance from a nonprofit to help work directly with our small businesses one-on-one. But that's been delayed, and challenges at reaching the Latino community was also an issue in terms of translated material. It's been disastrous in its rollout. So I hope that these things get worked out so that in early 2014, our small businesses can feel secure about what their health insurance is actually going to cost and what kind of impact this is going to have on their employees.
But you're hearing lots of complaints right now.
I'm hearing a lot of concern.
Okay. Jonathan, a big issue at the legislature in this last session was the election law reforms that you had a part in lobbying on behalf of. These involve changing whether or not people can gather early ballots en masse. Political groups can gather the early ballots. It changes whether or not third-party candidates can get on the ballot, kind of raises the threshold for them. It changes the rules on initiatives, and it makes it easier to purge people from the permanent early ballot list. And why did you think these changes were important?
Well, I think that the idea of giving your ballot to just about anybody without knowing who those people are, without being within the regular framework of the election officials and your mailman, for example, is a bad thing. We have people, right now, if the law gets thrown out, there are people that, if you're a felon, you can't vote, you can't sign a petition, you can't circulate a petition, but you can actually collect someone's ballot. That's a reality. And we know that even the petition effort that happened in this last, right after the session was completed, felons were actually gathering petitions for this. We already have that proof of that. And I think that the biggest problem is that if you ask most people in the audience tonight, do you think it's a good idea to give your ballot, or that someone should take your ballot and have bags and bags of ballots driving around Tucson or Phoenix or anywhere else with your ballot in that group? I think most people would say that's insane. They can't believe it. In fact, we're pretty much the only state that I know of that does this. California, for example, forbids the collecting of ballots by people that are not related, for example.
And Jeff, and we had a rather remarkable thing happen with, as Jonathan pointed out, a referendum effort that has, at least at this point, successfully gathered enough signatures to put this on the ballot, barring any court challenges that might come forward. Your thoughts on how a campaign like that might roll out?
Well, I think that we'll be successful, just like we were successful in the referendum effort. You know, the Republican Party views itself as being king of this planet, king of this state, and that they're entitled to win elections. And this bill was an attempt at voter suppression to basically ensure that Republicans have a better and better chance of winning this state. They can see the tide turning. They can see the Hispanic community growing, but we were up to 18%, which is 4% more than the previous presidential election of the turnout was the Latino voter. They can see that rising tide, and they're scared of it, frankly. And so they're going to do everything, and they're doing everything they can in other states as well to suppress the minority and the youth vote. And that was what this was an attempt to do. And they always raise this imaginary boogeyman of election fraud. Well, when we ask them, where's the election fraud? Where is it? Where is it? Go ahead, point it out. And they say, oh, we've got these snowbird couples that voted in Kansas and voted here. Oh, and there were, they have nothing. I mean, there's virtually nothing. And you don't have to give your ballot to anybody. So he says, you want your ballot mixed in with this? No, you don't. But How Pierce got knocked off in the recall election was the collection of these ballots by activists who wanted to get rid of Russell Pierce, and that's really what it's about. Is about tamping down voters and taking control of their own ballot. They get to choose what they want. They can mail it in. They can drop it off. It's up to them.
Let me bring Leah in here, because Leah, your organization was involved in some of these efforts in getting the Latino voter pickup through collection of ballots and things like that. And you had concerns about this legislation as it was passing through the Capitol.
I did. So our Hispanic chamber certainly supports the Get Out the Vote effort. So I have concerns about a law like this that would change, that would impact the ease in which people can vote. We're already having such challenges in getting the Latino voter turnout that I think that this is not the answer to eliminate. I understand the practicalities that Jonathan brought up, but there's got to be a different solution. We don't want to see a dramatic drop in the Latino voter turnout in upcoming elections.
And Jonathan, are we likely to see anything at the legislature this year to further change these laws to somehow hamstring the referendum?
Well, there's nothing preventing the legislature from passing more laws. That's what it does. And I guess my response would be, I don't think Latinos need somebody to take when they fill out a ballot, to take that to the polls for them. I don't think anybody needs that. I think they can do that on their own. They can put it in the mailbox and mail it. And I think that the idea that Jeff was saying, that there's no evidence of fraud. Karen Osborne, who is the elections director in Maricopa County, is a Democrat, by the way, has stated that people in Maricopa County were posing as election officials going through these neighborhoods, saying that they were from Maricopa County elections. And she stated that on the record.
Well, that's wrong, and they shouldn't be doing stuff like that.
And so
people should get caught with that.
That's an example of
you
fraud.
still haven't shown me any evidence of fraudulent ballots. Ballots where people are pretending to be someone else, or they're not legal citizens. There's just no proof out there.
501c3 organizations posing as election officials. You have 501c3 organizations screening ballots to find out whether they're going to be voting Republican or Democrat. Though there is no protections whatsoever on whether felons are gathering these ballots whatsoever. I think that you yourself, I cannot imagine that you would give your ballot to somebody that you didn't know that came to your door. And I think you've said on this show that you probably wouldn't.
I probably wouldn't, but if I have difficulty, if I'm a little older and I have difficulty getting to the polls, and it's the last weekend before it, and I know that the only way now that it can be delivered is by me going to the polls, and I don't feel up to going to the polls, or I have trouble with work, or there's a myriad of reasons why people would say, oh my God, I forgot all about that. It's too late now to mail it in.
And you know what, we're going to debate this a lot, I think, in the year to come. So with less than 2 minutes left, I wanted to just ask each of you about what you thought the biggest stories of the year were outside of what we talked about here. I'll start with you, Jonathan.
Well, I want to talk at least about a story that wasn't necessarily the biggest, but I think is going to have the biggest impact on the state. And that there is one item that's going to be on the ballot already that was a bill that was just passed by the legislature, referred to the ballot. And it's going to be dealing with federalism and gives the state the ability to not pay for federal measures, which is completely constitutional. It'll be on the ballot, and it's going to create a lot of debate going into the future and possibly change the relationship between the federal government and the state of Arizona.
And you're working on that campaign.
I absolutely am, and I think that it's so full disclosure. Full disclosure.
That kind of stuff is just, again, the federal supremacy clause is going to knock that out. We got to quit doing that stuff.
Less than a minute.
I think the best story of the year that doesn't get reported on is Obama's success in foreign policy. I mean, the success in foreign policy is just, he's about to reach something that's kind of like Nixon going to China in basically getting an agreement from Iran to shut down their nuclear policy. You look at him getting us out of a couple of wars, et cetera.
And 30 seconds, Leah.
Okay, I think it's going to be education reform. I think we talked about Prop 204 within this last election cycle, and with the gubernatorial races coming up in 2014, we're going to be talking a lot about education funding and finance and reform, and that's going to be the hot topic in 2014.
All right. A lot to look forward to in 2014. I'm real excited about these elections that are coming up. That is our show for tonight. I appreciate you guys coming in here. Have a very happy holiday, and we will be right back with some closing thoughts. That's our show for today. But you can learn more about politics by visiting news.azpm.org or by following us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Jim Nintzel. Thanks for watching another edition of AZ Illustrated Politics.